Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something genuinely fascinating, the SCAR's Flute Law Archive. Now, we're going to explore this beautiful, highly exact intersection of acoustic physics, physical engineering, and, well, human breath. This archive, it isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill how-to guide. Oh no, it is a meticulously preserved doctrine that treats learning an instrument as a highly structured, almost scientific process. Let's dive right in with a foundational core law. This single quote sets an absolute doctrinal tone for exactly how we have to approach the instrument. It completely strips away all the fluff and superstition of making music and just reduces it to precise physical actions. Listen to the verbs here: hold, seal, blow, focus, change, shape. It's literally a command set for the human body interfacing with a machine. To really grasp this work-play function, we'll break the doctrine down into 5 core areas: the artifact identity, the governing acoustic law, the human-air interface, the practice architecture, and finally, the maintenance covenant. Starting off with part 1, the artifact identity, specifically the preserved visual evidence of the Gemeinhardt 2SP. What's actually super interesting here is that this whole archive is grounded in one very specific physical object: SCAR's Gemeinhardt 2SP. The document makes a really sharp point right out of the gate. This isn't just some generic, nameless flute pulled from a dusty band where, as the text perfectly puts it, school band ambition goes to tarnish. No, it's a known, preserved entity, and its specific engineering fundamentally shapes how the player experiences it. When examining the origin marks in the keywork, you kind of have to appreciate the archivist's witty little warning. They note that metal glare and curvature remain enemies of certainty, which is exactly why some of the serial numbers are recorded with intentional ambiguity. But the physical reality of this 2SP, manufactured right in Elkhart, Indiana, is absolutely undeniable. The archive totally refuses to fake certainty where there isn't any. It just treats the evidence as an honest witness to the machine itself. And, the physical engineering choices of the 2SP, they are 100% deliberate. You've got closed-hole plateau keys that completely forgive imprecise fingers. There's an offset G key that prevents your left hand from twisting into some unnatural claw, and the C-foot joint keeps the whole silver tube nice and light. The archive states this profound truth: student design is mercy, not a limitation. These features literally exist because someone remembered, hey, actual human hands have to hold this thing. Moving right along to part 2, the governing acoustic law, or the physics of the silver tube. So here's the absolute crucial point. A transverse flute is not something you blow directly into like a recorder. I mean, if you blow straight down the tube, you're going to get nothing. Nada. Instead, it's what's called an edge tone resonator. You actually have to create a free air jet with your lips and shoot it across the holes so it splits right at the far edge. The archivist humorously calls this weaponized leakage. It's this inherently unstable act that, magically, eventually locks into a beautiful, stable resonance pattern. Now notice the stark difference between what your breath is doing and what your hands are doing. It's actually a huge misconception that your fingers create the pitch. They totally don't. Your fingers are just mechanical modifiers. They're simply configuring the active length of the tube. It's actually your air speed and your air angle that dictate the pitch tendency, the tone color, and which octave register you're playing in. The air does all the heavy lifting. Which brings us perfectly to part 3, the human-air interface. This is where flesh meets machine. So, the physical interface starts right at the embouchure. Your lower lip acts as an anchor, covering roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of the hole, while your lips form this tiny, flexible nozzle. And remember that crucial warning: do not stretch into a wide smile. If you pull your lips back into a smile, you'll dangerously thin out your aperture and completely ruin that focused airstream you need to split the edge. Your lip center has to stay relaxed and flexible, with just the corners giving you stability. Once you've got that airstream flowing, you have to shape it. Enter the articulation law. This protocol dictates that all attacks and staccatos happen by using your tongue as a gate for continuous air. You don't start a note by just huffing aggressively from your throat. No brute force here. Instead, you keep a steady, continuous breath pressure, and you simply use your tongue, forming syllables like to or do or tut to cleanly release and interrupt that airstream. Next up is part 4, the practice architecture, or building the cathedral brick by brick. I find this learner roadmap absolutely fascinating, mostly because of how incredibly unglamorous it is. You don't just pick the instrument up and start ripping through a song. No, You start by just trying to make the head joint speak. Then you play exactly 4 stable notes. Then you build a basic white note skeleton, just a simple C major scale. This deliberate looping process perfectly captures the archivist's wisdom. We humans constantly forget that mastery usually arrives disguised as boring repetition. It's all about building that cathedral brick by brick through tiny, repeated microcorrections. Finally, we reach part 5, the maintenance covenant, troubleshooting and preserving the system. Because let's face it, things are gonna go wrong. And when they do, we have to ask ourselves, when the tone gets airy, or the notes crack, or that low register just absolutely refuses to speak, is it the human, or is it the machine that's at fault? Well, the archive answers that with a very strict correction matrix. Notice how for literally every single problem listed, whether there's no sound, an airy tone, or you're playing sharp or flat, the first and second corrections are entirely on the player. Your ear is the ultimate diagnostic tool. Before you ever think about blaming the machine, you've got to adjust your angle, your airspeed, or your posture. The flute tells on the player immediately. It's kind of rude, honestly, but it's incredibly useful. Now, that being said, the machine definitely can fail if you ignore the maintenance protocol. These strict rules are there for a reason. Forcing keys during assembly or leaving pads damp can instantly ruin the instrument. If you twist the flute by the keys, you'll bend the delicate rods and cause leaks. And the second you do that, the fault shifts from your technique right over to a genuinely broken machine. I absolutely love this warning from the archivist. Humans possess a devastating talent for destroying delicate objects by existing near them. Isn't that the truth? It perfectly underscores exactly why this instrument demands such deep, cautious reverence. Don't leave it loose on the couch where your friend is going to sit on it. You have to respect the physical reality of the machine. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to chew on this final thought from the doctrine. The archive is sealed, the practice remains open. Think about how your own interactions with complex systems, whether you're learning an instrument, writing code, or picking up a new sport, could benefit from this exact kind of structured approach. If you balance rigid, uncompromising physical laws with the humble, everyday art of practice, what kind of mastery might you achieve in your own life? Thanks for exploring the Scars Flute Law with me today. Keep practicing, and I'll catch you next time. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a seriously fascinating intersection: physical mechanics, acoustic physics, and just pure mindful human discipline. We're breaking down what's called Scars Flute Law. It's this highly structured, incredibly insightful analysis of the transverse flute, all based around one very specific documented instrument. Whether you're a musician yourself, or honestly just someone who appreciates that beautiful collision of engineering and art, you're gonna love this. So let's jump right in. I want to hit you immediately with this core law right out of our source document. Just listen to the rhythm of this directive. Hold lightly, seal cleanly, blow across, focus air, change tube length with fingers. Man, it's just so precise, right? It's rhythmic, and it sets the perfect doctrinal tone for our whole analysis today. Because you see, the flute isn't about brute force at all. It's entirely about alignment. Here's our roadmap, or the command layer for today. 1. The witness artifact. 2. The laws of sound. 3. The human interface. 4. The practice architecture. And 5. The maintenance covenant. Let's get to it. Section 1. The witness artifact. Now, we're looking at some pure visual evidence here. This is SCAR's specific Gemeinhardt 2SP flute. We are grounding our whole discussion in this tangible object because, as the document brilliantly points out, we really have to treat this evidence as a witness. We're not dealing with some generic flute pulled from an anonymous storage bin. We're looking at a real instrument with an Elkhart origin marking and a specific serial region. We have to preserve uncertainty where it exists. Because, let's be real, faking certainty about details you don't know is just, well, as the source says, bureaucracy wearing a shiny hat. So let's look at the machine advantage of this specific model. The Gemeinhardt 2SP is what's known as a student concert C flute. But, as our source highlights, student design actually means mercy, not limitation. It features closed-hole plateau keys, which absolutely drastically reduce the difficulty of sealing the tone holes with your fingers. Then there's the offset G layout that supports a much more natural posture for your left-hand ring finger. And the C foot joint keeps the whole thing lighter by setting low C as the absolute bottom boundary. Basically, it's a wonderfully forgiving mechanism designed to help the human actually succeed. All right, moving on to Section 2, the laws of sound. Now, the governing acoustic law of this flute is that it operates as an edge tone resonator. Basically, sound is produced when a free air jet created by the player's lips crosses the embouchure hole and literally splits right at the far edge. One part of that air rolls down into the tube and the other part spills away. That unstable edge is what creates resonance in the body tube. I absolutely love how the source text describes this. It points out that all flute music basically begins with weaponized leakage. I mean, it's just a magnificent little nuisance. So how do we actually control this edge tone resonator? Well, we use what the archive calls the playable control equation. Airspeed plus air angle plus active tube length equals your pitch tendency, your register, and your tone color. Everything the instrument makes, every single sound, every tiny dynamic shift is totally dictated by this exact formula. The absolutely crucial point here is how we apply this equation in real time. Your fingers do not magically create the pitch. They simply configure the tube length. Opening and closing those keys just changes the effective acoustic length of the tube. It's your embouchure that actually selects which harmonic speaks. Slow, warm air yields the first octave. Fast, narrow air drives the second and third octaves. So the fingers just set the stage, but the player's air, that's what actually drives the register. Section 3, the human interface. This comparison brilliantly illustrates the core difference between the transverse flute and an instrument like, say, a recorder. The flute is fundamentally not blown into. Think about a recorder. You blow directly into a fixed, pre-made wind weight, right? But with the flute, the player's lips have to actually form and steer the air jet. You are the nozzle. You have to actively aim a thin, focused stream directly across the opening. To pull that off, the human has to follow a really strict physical sequence. First, you rest your lower lip gently on the lip plate. Second, cover roughly 1/3 of the embouchure hole. And third, direct a focused airstream right across the hole. But here's the critical caveat from the text, and it's a big one. Do this without a wide smile. Pulling your lips into a stretched grin just thins the aperture and completely spoils the tone. You need firm corners to steer the jet, but the actual center of your lips has to remain relaxed and flexible. Section 4, the practice architecture. Here we have the learner roadmap matrix, and notice how deliberately small and unglamorous this all is. You start at stage 0 with just gentle assembly. Stage 1 is literally just making the head joint speak. Stage 2 is finding 4 stable notes. It's a constant progression of micro corrections, right? Angle, speed, coverage, seal. It's a great reminder that true mastery in anything isn't about brute force. As the source beautifully puts it, building this skill is exactly like building a cathedral, brick by brick. You can't master the flute with anxiety or just blowing harder. Humans keep forgetting mastery arrives disguised as repetition. Wow, what an incredibly powerful statement from our source. The real goal here is a synthesis of work and play, serious work achieved through playable, highly repetitive patterns. This unglamorous, small playable loop is the absolute key to making the whole doctrine actually function in the real world. And finally, Section 5, the maintenance covenant. Okay, I had to include this quote from the archive because it's both hilarious and entirely accurate. Humans possess a devastating talent for destroying delicate objects by existing near them. I mean, spot on, right? This is the ultimate warning about why we absolutely must store the flute safely in its case. You don't just leave it loose on a bed or a chair where someone might literally sit on it. But why does that preservation actually matter musically? Well, because you need to know if a problem is you or the machine. If you're getting an airy tone, sharp pitch, or cracking notes, that's a player error in air protocol or embouchure. But if you have a persistent failure of low notes despite having proper air, you might actually have leaks, bent rods, or sticky pads. That's a machine error. The doctrine teaches the human air protocol for sure, but ultimately a professional repair technician has to confirm the health of the machine. To prevent those machine errors and preserve the evidence, there are strict maintenance laws you absolutely have to follow. You need to swab the moisture from all joints after playing, dry the pads with proper pad paper and no yanking or scraping, please, wipe the exterior gently, and most importantly, as the text stresses heavily, literally never press the delicate rods or keywork during assembly or cleaning. You'll bend them. Which leaves us with this final thought. The flute gives immediate and sometimes honestly rude feedback. It tells on you instantly. Every failure is diagnostic. So the ultimate question is, are you actually letting your ear rule the system? And honestly, whether you play the flute or not, what systems in your own life are trying to give you feedback that you just aren't listening to? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on SCAR's flute law. Until next time, respect the machine and keep practicing.
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're diving into something truly fascinating, a document called SCAR's flute law. You know, if you've ever looked at a flute and thought it seemed like this mystical, overly complicated silver wand, well, you're definitely not alone. But this document does something absolutely incredible. It decodes the seemingly magical art of flute playing into a strict, totally masterable system of physics and biomechanics. We're going to break down exactly how this instrument works, not with vague, artsy metaphors, but through hard, actionable science. Theodora, the researcher serving as our organizing voice here, kicks things off with what she calls the core law. Hold lightly, seal cleanly, blow across, focus air. It's a beautifully poetic yet scientifically rigid foundation for commanding the instrument. And honestly, this isn't just a list of helpful tips, it's the absolute operational doctrine. Every single advanced technique you'll ever learn on the flute is really just a variation or refinement of these specific core directives.
We're structuring this explainer like a dossier today, moving through 5 distinct phases of mastery: the artifact and its law, the physics of sound, the human-machine interface, the learner roadmap, and finally, troubleshooting and the covenant. Let's get right into it. Phase 1, the artifact and its law. We need to examine the highly specific physical machine at the absolute center of this doctrine.
Because we aren't just talking about some generic, anonymous metal tube pulled from a dusty bandroom storage bin. No, the doctrine focuses entirely on a very real instrument, SCAR's Gemeinhardt 2SP student flute, built right in Elkhart, Indiana. The document insists we treat this physical artifact as visual evidence. It's a machine built with a very specific logic, and we have to respect that logic if we actually wanted to sing.
And honestly, this student design is all about mercy, not limitation. It offers built-in mechanical advantages so the initial interface isn't completely brutal on a beginner's hands. Take the closed-hole plateau keys. You don't need absolute flawless fingertip placement to get a seal. Then there's the offset G key, which actually respects human anatomy and supports a natural left-hand shape. Plus, the C-foot joint keeps the whole thing physically lighter to hold. It's like the designers actually remembered that human hands exist.
Moving on to Phase 2, the physics of sound. This is where we have to show some real humility before the laws of acoustics. You really can't fight physics, but you absolutely can learn to steer it. Now, a huge conceptual hurdle for a lot of folks is realizing a flute doesn't take air the way a recorder does. A recorder literally gives you a fixed wooden or plastic windway to aim the air for you. But the flute? It's an edge tone resonator. The instrument doesn't do the aiming. In a pretty wild twist, you actually become part of the instrument. You have to actively form a nozzle with your own flexible lips to steer a free air jet across the opening. And here's the crazy part. Sound only happens when that focused air jet crosses the embouchure hole and literally splits against the far edge. Half the air rolls into the tube, and the rest just spills away. That unstable edge is what creates the resonance. The doctrine calls this phenomenon weaponized leakage, which is just a brilliant and kind of hilarious way to put it. Your job isn't to just blow air into the flute, it's to master that exact, precise split of air across the top of it.
So that brings us to Phase 3, the human-machine interface. We know the machine, we know the physics of the sound, but how do we, as humans, actually control this magnificent little nuisance?
Well, it all boils down to the control equation. This is a mental model you absolutely have to memorize. Get this, your fingers only configure the tube length. Pressing keys doesn't magically generate pitch, it just changes the length of the resonating hallway. It's actually your airspeed and your air angle that determine the pitch, the register, and the tone color. Your body powers the air, your lips shape it, and your fingers just open and close the doors.
Because of this setup, you can pull off what honestly feels like a magic trick, hitting totally different octaves using the exact same fingering. To do it, the doctrine tells us to use warmer, slower, and broader air for that low first octave. But when you want to jump up to the second octave, you blast much faster, narrower air. Your fingers don't move a millimeter, but the airspeed completely changes the register.
To pull this off, your mouth basically has to become a highly precise nozzle. You rest your lower lip heavily on the plate, covering maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of the hole, and form a small, flexible oval. And here's a massive tip. Do not pull your lips into a wide, rigid smile. That stretches everything too thin and totally ruins the tone. Just firm up the corners. Oh, and your throat doesn't stop the air. Your tongue does. It acts as a gate, using syllables like to, do, or tut to shape the very beginning of the notes.
All right, Phase 4, the learner roadmap.
Theory is great, but execution is the whole game. And let's be real, we humans tend to forget that mastery usually arrives disguised as incredibly boring repetition.
This roadmap illustrates a staged, continuous journey. You start with the absolute basics, gentle setup making a simple sound on just the head joint alone, and progress to establishing stable notes. It's literally like building a sonic cathedral brick by brick. You absolutely cannot jump to stage 7 and start throwing in vibrato and pitch bends before you've completely nailed that stable white note skeleton back in stage 3. It is all about disciplined sequential layering.
Which brings us to our final phase, phase 5, troubleshooting and the covenants. Because, let's face it, even with perfect discipline practice, your system is inevitably going to break down. Things will go wrong.
Remember that core law, let the ear rule the system? Well, as this fantastic quote reminds us, every failure is diagnostic. The flute is a brutally honest mirror for your technique. If it sounds terrible, it's giving you immediate, unfiltered feedback. It might feel a bit rude in the moment, for sure, but it's deeply, deeply useful if you actually know how to listen to it.
So when you get that rude feedback, you don't just blow harder, you don't use brute force. You consult this correction matrix and make targeted micro-corrections. Playing a little flat, roll the flute out slightly and increase your focused air. Playing sharp, roll it in and relax that airspeed. It's a highly systematic process of tweaking your air angle, your speed, and your whole coverage until that resonance just perfectly locks in.
But hey, there's a limit to human error. If your low notes are consistently failing, and you know your air and fingers are dead on, the machine itself might actually be compromised. That's why the doctrine insists on a strict maintenance covenant. You have to swab out the moisture entirely, and you're absolutely forbidden from using those delicate keys as handles when you assemble it, because you will bend the rods and cause leaks. No question.
The document also bluntly reminds us of a hard truth. Humans have a truly devastating talent for destroying delicate things just by existing near them. Please don't leave your flute loose on a bed or a chair where someone's going to sit on it, and, most importantly, if the mechanism does get bent or the pads are leaking, don't blindly blame your own lack of talent. Sometimes fake certainty just masks the fact that you genuinely need a professional repair technician to fix your broken machine.
Wrapping up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, beautiful thought from the doctrine. The machine is simple. The interaction is complex. The result is music. I think that perfectly captures the whole shebang. The physics are entirely knowable, the mechanics make total sense, but it's the human application that takes a lifetime to really nail down. So I have to ask you, how are you going to approach your own complex challenges, now that you know mastery is really just a mix of physics, strict protocol, and relentless patience? Keep learning, keep practicing, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer on the SCAR's flute law document. Today, we're exploring something pretty incredible, how we literally tame raw physics to create musical beauty out of a remarkably simple silver tube. It's a deep dive into acoustic laws, intricate biomechanics, and the surprising philosophy behind mastering an instrument. We aren't just looking at how to play a few notes, we're looking at how we humans interface with a machine, and how that machine, in turn, disciplines us. Listen to this core law. Hold lightly. Seal cleanly. Blow across. Focus air. Change tube length with fingers. Change register with airspeed. Shape beginnings with tongue. Shape meaning with breath. Let the ear rule the system. I mean, it almost sounds like a Zen koan, right? But this profound set of rules sets the authoritative tone for everything we're about to uncover today. It sounds so simple on its face, but it governs an entire tiny silver weather system, telling us exactly how to approach this object before we even try to make a sound. To navigate this whole protocol, we're going to follow a specific 6-part progression. We've got the artifact identity, the governing acoustic law, the human-air interface, the architecture of practice, the maintenance covenant, and finally, the closing doctrine. Simple enough, right? Let's get to it. Section 1. The artifact identity. Grounding theory in physical reality. Let's look at the actual, tangible instrument this entire doctrine is built around. Now, this isn't just some anonymous silver tube you'd find in a dusty middle school storage bin where band dreams kind of go to tarnish. No, this is a very specific instrument. It's SCAR's Gemeinhardt 2 SP, proudly made right in Elkhart, Indiana. The doctrine grounds everything in this tangible reality, which is a great reminder that music doesn't just happen in the abstract. It happens right here, on this exact piece of machined metal. And look at the student design on this thing. You've got closed-hole plateau keys, an offset G, and a C foot joint. Now, you might be wondering what that actually means for a player. Basically, it proves that the design here is an act of mercy, not a limitation. Because they're closed-hole keys, you don't have to perfectly seal open holes with the fleshy pads of your fingertips, which, trust me, is a massive headache for beginners. Plus, that offset G supports a way more natural, relaxed hand shape. It's a machine literally designed to forgive our clumsy human hands while we figure out its rules. Moving on to Section 2, the governing acoustic law. From cold, hard silver to living sound. How do we actually coax music out of this thing? So, a flute doesn't just magically take in air and spit out a note. Unlike a recorder, which has a windway built right in, the flute makes you do the work. You have to create the windway yourself with your lips. It's an edge tone resonator. Sound only kicks in when a jet of air crosses the embouchure hole and splits precisely at the far edge, locking into a stable resonance. The source document calls this weaponized leakage, which is just an absolutely brilliant term. A crucial part of your airstream rolls down into the tube to make the sound, and the rest just kind of spills out into the room. This brings us to a super crucial control equation. Your fingers, they only configure the active tube length. Opening and closing those silver keys just makes the tube acoustically longer or shorter. Honestly, that's the easy part. The real magic is that your airspeed and angle dictate the actual pitch, the register, and the tone color. If you want low notes, you need warm, slow air gently pouring into the tube. High notes, you better be shooting fast, narrow, precisely aimed air straight across it. You are piloting the air, not just pressing buttons. All right, Section 3, the human-air interface, biomechanics of the embouchure. Let's see how we physically connect with the instrument. So, how do we actually pull this off physically? First, your lips basically become a living, breathing nozzle. You rest your lower lip on the lip plate, covering roughly a quarter to a third of the hole. You want firm corners to direct the air, but a super flexible center. And here is a huge pro tip. Do not smile. Seriously, stretching your lips into a wide grin thins out the aperture, creates crazy facial tension, and totally ruins your tone. Finally, you use your tongue, never your throat, to cleanly gate the airstream with crisp syllables like to, do, or tut. Up next is Section 4, Architecture of Practice, Building a Cathedral Brick by Brick. Let's talk about how we actually learn this. Knowing the physics is cool and all, but how do we practice without losing our minds? Well, you use a highly structured, almost rigid progression. You start small. First, just find your basic sound on the head joint. Then, lock in some stable notes, your B, A, G, and C. After that, you build a white note skeleton to master the core scale. You only move on to the fancy stuff, like articulation, dynamics, and cool tone colors, once your tone is perfectly centered. You really can't skip a step here. There's a quote from the explainer that I absolutely love. Humans keep forgetting mastery arrives disguised as repetition. This is so true, right? Whether you're learning an instrument, a complex language, or a demanding new sport. You just have to embrace the daily grind, the slow assembly of parts, playing those single long notes, and really truly listening. That is how you achieve actual command over the instrument. Which leads us right into Section 5, the Maintenance Covenant, troubleshooting the human-machine equation. What happens when things inevitably go wrong? Look, the flute is going to tell on you immediately when you mess up. It's kind of rude, honestly, but very useful. This correction matrix is your real-time cheat sheet for fixing errors on the fly. Let's walk through it. Getting an airy tone? First thing, focus your airstream and firm up those corners. If that fails, try rolling the flute slightly in or out. What if the tone is choked? Roll out a bit and uncover the hole slightly. If you're playing sharp, roll in and relax your airspeed. Playing flat? Roll out, push some focused air, and lift up that posture. You never have to guess, you just systematically apply the physics. But what about protecting the physical hardware itself? The doctrine drops this hilarious yet painfully accurate warning. Humans possess a devastating talent for destroying delicate objects by existing near them. Seriously, do not leave this thing sitting loose on the couch or a chair. We are fundamentally a clumsy species, and if you sit on a flute, it is deeply unforgiving. To avoid total accidental destruction, you have to honor the hardware care covenant. When you put it together, use a gentle twist. Never grab the delicate keys or you're gonna bend the internal steel rods. Always swab out the moisture when you're done playing. If the pads get sticky, use proper pad paper. And hey, if your low notes just constantly fail despite perfect air and perfect fingering, cut yourself some slack. It might not be you. A professional repair tech might need to check the machine itself for microscopic leaks. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the closing doctrine, the philosophy of Arateia Agan Agape. let's step back and look at the bigger picture. The author leaves us with a really fascinating thought about preserving uncertainty where it exists. The text says, fake certainty is not scholarship. It is bureaucracy wearing a shiny hat. I love that. Basically, if a serial number stamped on an old instrument is smudged, you don't just invent a digit to fill out a form. In practice, this means we have to align ourselves with the physical reality of the instrument, flaws and all, instead of trying to brute force our way through it or faking certainty to feel better. Which brings us full circle to that very first rule. Let the ear rule the system. The flute absolutely does not lie. Every squeak, crack, or airy note is a precise diagnostic tool telling you exactly what went wrong physically. So I want to leave you with this to think about. If we take this beyond music, if we stop forcing things, drop the fake certainty, and actually start truly listening to our own mistakes, what kind of beauty could we create? Welcome to The Explainer. Now, today we're doing something a little bit different. We aren't just going through a generic music lesson here. Instead, we're taking a deep dive into an exact, archived operational doctrine designed for a highly specific silver machine. It's called the Z-Flute Zero Scar Archive, and it's fascinating because it treats the art of playing the Gemeinhardt 2 SP flute not as some kind of unexplainable magic, but as a strict biomechanical human-machine interface. So we're looking at a system built on deep research, really precise physics, and absolute structural clarity. Okay, let's jump right into this. Here is our strictly mandated path for today. We'll be hitting 6 distinct phases. 1. The Gemeinhardt 2 SP artifact. 2. Physics of the edge tone. 3. The flute control equation. 4. The 7-stage learner roadmap. 5. Machine maintenance and error. And finally, 6. The final playing doctrine. All right, Section 1. The Gemeinhardt 2 SP artifact. A specific silver machine. So we need to be clear right off the bat. We are not talking about some anonymous instrument pulled from a dusty middle school storage bin. You know, the kind where band ambition goes to tarnish. We're looking at a very precise configuration. This is SCAR's Gemeinhardt 2 SP, anchored specifically to the summer of 2003. Just look at that long view of the closed-hole plateau keywork. The archive actually treats this instrument as a preserved visual witness, capturing it in exact, painstaking detail. And this perfectly illustrates the archive's intense commitment to visual evidence. On one side, we see the serial region, which is recorded as starting with a 7, followed by this tiny unresolved symbol or separator, and then 1026. On the other side, we have the origin mark, Elkhart, Indiana. Now, the author of this archive, an organizing research voice known as Theodora, absolutely refuses to bulldoze uncertainty into neat little answers. The glare, the wear and tear on the metal, they're preserved exactly as they are. It's authentic, uncompromising archiving where the uncertain simply remains uncertain. So you might be wondering, why this specific machine design? Well, the primary advantages are the closed-hole keys, an offset G, and a C foot joint. As the research points out, these design choices offer incredible mercy to the student. The closed-hole keys give you a forgiving seal, meaning you don't have to flawlessly plug holes with your exact fingertips. The offset G supports a totally natural, relaxed shape for the left-hand ring finger. No painful hand contortions required. And that C-foot joint? It keeps the whole instrument significantly lighter by ditching the unnecessary weight and reach of a low B key. Here, student design is all about mercy, not limitation. Moving on to Section 2, Physics of the Edge Tone. Time for some humility before physics. Okay, here is the governing acoustic law of the land. An edge tone resonator is an instrument that speaks when a focused airstream crosses an embouchure hole and physically splits against the far edge. One part of your air rolls down into the tube and the rest just spills away into the room. That unstable edge is what actually creates resonance inside the body tube. Or, as the archive hilariously puts it, all flute music basically begins with, and I love this phrase, weaponized leakage. It really is a magnificent little nuisance. Now, the crucial thing to understand is how this actually differs from other wind instruments. Think about a recorder for a second. You blow into it, and a fixed, pre-made plastic windway steers the jet of air for you. Easy, right? But the transverse flute, that requires the player's own lips to act as a flexible nozzle. You aren't blowing down into the flute. Instead, your lower lip covers roughly 1/3 of the hole, and you steer the jet straight across it. The corners of your mouth have to stay stable while the center stays flexible. You are literally becoming part of the machine's acoustics. Section 3, the flute control equation. Let's look at the mathematical model. Take a look at this quote. Air speed plus air angle plus active tube length equals pitch tendency, register, and tone color. This right here is the playable control model. It absolutely proves that playing the flute isn't some mystical, magical talent you're just born with. It is a highly predictable biomechanical reaction. Your body powers the air, your lips shape it, your fingers configure the tube, and your ear judges the result. Bottom line, if you understand the inputs, you absolutely control the outputs. Let's break that equation down into two primary laws, okay? First up is the fingering law. Your fingers configure the tube length. Pressing keys doesn't magically generate notes. It literally lengthens or shortens the active column of air inside that silver tube. So more closed holes equal the longer tube, which equals a lower pitch. Second, we have the register law. Airspeed and aperture dictate your octave. Because the flute overblows, the exact same fingering can actually speak in 3 completely different octaves. Slower, warm air gets you the first octave, but faster, narrower air, that forces the instrument up into the second and third octaves. All right, Section 4, the 7-stage learner roadmap, a strict architectural build. This roadmap is just brilliantly organized. It scales systematically from stage 0, which is all set up and care, like please never use the delicate keys as handles, all the way up to stage 7, which deals with advanced colors and effects like vibrato, pitch bends, and harmonics. The very first playable loop is kept deliberately small. You assemble it, find your head joint tone in stage 1, finger a simple BAG sequence in stage 2, build out a basic white note skeleton in stage 3, then you listen, you correct, and you repeat. Is it glamorous? No. But as the archive so wisely reminds us, true mastery arrives disguised as simple, unglamorous repetition. Section 5. Machine maintenance and error. It's the player versus the hardware. So here's the thing about the flute. It is an incredibly honest machine. It tells on the player immediately, and we can see that in this correction matrix. If your tone sounds airy, the matrix tells you that your first correction is to focus your stream and firm up the corners of your mouth. If you're playing sharp, roll the flute in towards you and relax your air speed. If a note cracks entirely, you need to stabilize your air and check your register aim. The point is, every failure is diagnostic. It demands a specific micro-correction from the human air protocol before you are ever allowed to blame the silver tube. But sometimes it actually is the hardware's fault. And usually that's because of us. The archive includes this maintenance covenant with an absolute gem of warning. It says, humans possess a devastating talent for destroying delicate objects by existing near them. I mean, spot on, right? This is exactly why you have to swab the moisture out after every single time you play, and why the flute must never, ever be left loose on a bed, a couch, or a chair. If you accidentally sit on it and bend those delicate rods, all the perfect air angles in the world aren't going to save your sound. And finally, Section 6, the final playing doctrine, bringing it all together into a harmonious philosophy. We've covered the artifact, the physics, the equations, the roadmap, and the errors. So here it is, the ultimate operational command for managing this little silver weather system. Read it with me and internalize it. Hold lightly, seal cleanly, blow across, focus air, change tube length with fingers, change register with air speed, shape beginnings with tongue, shape meaning with breath. Let the ear rule the system. It's an exact, highly playable philosophy that completely protects the player from superstition. Exactness keeps you grounded, for sure, but playfulness, that keeps the doctrine alive enough for you to actually want to practice. And so we reach the end of the Z-Flute OSCAR protocol. The physical instrument has been preserved, the laws of physics are thoroughly documented, and the operational doctrine is set in stone. The archive is sealed. Is your practice open? I really hope this explainer has given you the structured clarity you need to interface with this incredible machine. Remember, mastery is really just a matter of air, angles, and repetition. The rest? Well, the rest is totally up to you. Welcome to the explainer. Today, we're doing something a little entirely different. We are not just doing your standard run-of-the-mill music lesson. No, we're embarking on a deep dive into the mechanical and honestly philosophical blueprint of a very specific physical object. We're looking at a totally fascinating archive known as the Scars Flute Law Doctrine. It's this beautifully meticulous document that analyzes a single flute, but it doesn't just look at it as a musical instrument, it treats it as a complex machine where human biomechanics literally collide with acoustics. It actually frames playing an instrument as interacting with a delicate silver weather system. If you want to really understand the physics of sound and human control, this explainer is going to completely change how you view woodwinds forever. Okay, let's dive into this core law. Hold lightly, seal cleanly, blow across, focus air, change tube length with fingers, change register with airspeed, shape beginnings with tongue, shape meaning with breath. Let the ear rule the system. That is the absolute core law from our archival source. And right away, it sets a highly structured, slightly academic, and just deeply philosophical tone for everything we're about to unpack today. This isn't just about reading dots on sheet music, It's a rigorous doctrine of physical alignment. It essentially demands your total humility before the laws of physics. To navigate this archive properly, we've got a clear 5-part document navigation system. We'll systematically deconstruct this by starting with artifact identity, moving into the machine advantage, exploring the physics of weaponized leakage, detailing the human-air interface, and wrapping up with architecture and maintenance. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the artifact and identity. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that we are looking at a preserved mechanical witness. This isn't just some anonymous flute pulled from the back of a dusty school band storage bin where, let's be honest, ambition goes to tarnish. The archive actually preserves visual evidence of this specific object. On the left, you can see the closed-hole plateau keywork. On the right is a tight crop of the serial number region. And notice this. The serial number is recorded as 7, followed by a small, unresolved symbol, and then 1026. The archivist here flat-out refuses to bulldoze facts into nonsense. There's metal glare, there's curvature making that symbol hard to read, and rather than just guessing, the doctrine preserves the exact reality of the object. It's such a brilliant standard of evidence. Fake certainty is not scholarship, right? And here we have the specific origin marking. This is a Gemeinhardt 2 SP student concert C flute, crafted right in Elkhart, Indiana. It's a silver-plated machine built with a highly precise purpose, carrying both memory and machine logic together. Identifying this artifact is absolutely crucial because the physical realities of this specific instrument dictate the exact rules we have to use to command it. Moving right along to Section 2, the machine advantage. So, how exactly is the physical hardware for this specific flute intentionally designed to aid the learner? Well, the source highlights 3 specific features that make this student design an act of total mercy, not limitation. First up, the closed-hole plateau keys. These massively reduce finger seal complexity. You don't have to perfectly plug an open hole with the exact dead center of your fingertip. Second, the offset G layout. This actually supports a natural shape for your left-hand ring finger, so you avoid this cruel, unnatural twisting of the wrist. And third, the C foot joint design, which keeps the instrument lighter and better balanced by avoiding the unnecessary extra reach of a longer B foot joint. The machine is literally actively trying to help you succeed. And because of these forgiving mechanics, the learner can engage in what the doctrine calls work-play function. Now, this is defined as serious work through a playable pattern. The thing is, the flute is not mastered by anxiety. It's not mastered by brute force or just blowing harder until you turn red. It is mastered by repeated micro-corrections. You are constantly, and I mean constantly, adjusting the angle of your air, the speed, how much of the hole you're covering, and actively listening. You have to work with the machine's advantages, not fight against them. Which brings us to Section 3, with arguably the best title ever, Physics of Weaponized Leakage. Okay, so how exactly does this machine turn our breath into notes? The Gemeinhardt 2 SP is officially classified as an edge tone resonator. When you play, you are creating a free air jet with your lips. That jet travels across the embouchure hole and physically splits against the far edge. One part of the air rolls down into the tube, and the other part just spills away into the room. The resonance, the actual note you hear, only begins when that split air and the tube lock into a stable acoustic pattern. As the archive so poetically puts it, all the music you make on this instrument begins as weaponized leakage. It's just a magnificent little nuisance of physics. And this brilliantly illustrates how a transverse flute differs from something like, say, a recorder. With a recorder, a fixed internal windway automatically sets the air jet for you. You just blow into it, and it does the work. But with the flute, the player's own lips must act as the nozzle. You have to form, steer, and focus the free air jet entirely on your own. You are blowing across the hole, never straight down into it. You are literally half of the instrument's physics. That takes us to Section 4, the human air interface. This intense physical requirement means human biomechanics must directly meet the physics of the machine. So the crucial point is this controlled equation right here. Airspeed plus air angle plus active tube length equals your pitch tendency, your register, and your tone color. Guys, this isn't just a loose theory. It is the absolute formulaic control equation that dictates literally everything the flute does. If any single one of these variables is off, the entire system collapses. No pressure, right? To satisfy that strict equation, we have a specific biomechanical protocol. First, the lower lip rests on the lip plate and covers roughly 1/3 of the hole. The upper lip is what actually directs the airstream. The tongue acts as a gate. It shapes the very beginnings of the notes using syllables like to or do without actually stopping the breath support from your lungs. And finally, your fingers merely configure the active tube length. Honestly, that is a massive realization. Pressing the keys doesn't magically create the pitch. It merely sets the physical resonance length of the tube. It's your embouchure and your airspeed that select which harmonic actually speaks. The first octave takes warm, broad air. The second octave needs faster, narrower air. It's all incredibly deliberate. And finally, Section 5, Architecture and Maintenance. Once you understand those biomechanics, you have to apply them over time. The document lays out this highly rigorous, chronological practice roadmap. It's fascinating because it strictly forces you to build the foundation first, no skipping steps. It starts at stage 0, which is literally just gentle setup and care. Then it moves to finding just the basic head join sound. Then stage 2, forming stable, centered notes using a really simple B-A-G-C skeleton. Only after mastering that do you progress to stage 4, which is register control using airspeed instead of brute force. And finally to stage 7, exploring complex colors, vibrato, and pitch bends. The first playable loops are deliberately kept small and repetitive. Let's move to and see how this builds into an incredible tool, the correction matrix. Because the ear rules the system, the flute is going to tell on you immediately. It gives you feedback that is, well, frankly rude, but highly useful. If you have an airy tone, the matrix tells you to focus your stream and firm your mouth corners. If you are flat, roll out and increase your focused air. If a note cracks, stabilize your air and check your finger aim. Every failure is simply diagnostic feedback for your next micro-correction. The archive frames this whole process beautifully with a truly powerful thought. Neither is building a cathedral brick by brick. Humans keep forgetting mastery arrives disguised as repetition. I just love that. It frames those tedious, playable loops of practice not as some awful chore, but as grand architectural work. You are building something massive, one tiny micro-correction at a time. But of course, all of that beautiful architecture falls completely apart if you break the machine. The archive includes a super strict maintenance covenant, wrapped in some brilliant, dry archival humor. It explicitly warns you to never press the key work during assembly and never leave the flute loose on a bed or couch, pointing out that, quote, humans possess a devastating talent for destroying delicate objects by existing near them. So true. You have to swab the moisture out, you have to store it properly in its case. Because if the machine is compromised by wet pads or bent rods, all your biomechanical perfection means absolutely nothing. So we've deconstructed the artifact, the mechanics, the physics of the edge tone, the human-air interface, and the architectural journey of practice. The doctrine is laid totally bare. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought directly from the source material. The machine is simple, the interaction is complex, the result is music. Will you submit to the physics and build your cathedral, or will you let the silver weather system become fog? The archive is sealed, but your practice remains wide open. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and keep learning.